Dr. Monica Waller testified as an expert witness in Richard Allen's pretrial hearings. His defense is trying to have the 61 confessions suppressed, not ever heard by a jury, because the defense is claiming that the conditions that their client have been kept in since he was arrested or transferred to a maximum security prison and then to another prison in Terre Haute caused their client to experience temporary psychosis. Now, I will tell you that I believe it's an injustice for a defendant who has not been convicted of any crime to be kept in a prison, much less a maximum security prison. The fact that he was transferred out of that maximum security prison into a medium security prison, well, the injustice continues, because I don't think Richard Allen or any defendant not convicted should be kept in a prison under the same conditions as inmates in that prison. And Richard Allen is, by definition, in my opinion, or by fact, Richard Allen is an inmate at any prison that the state of Indiana decides to keep him in before and until he's convicted of a crime. That being said, Dr. Monica Waller, at first glance, I thought she'd make a better witness for the prosecution. She said that Richard Allen told her details of the crime, that, essentially he confessed to her and told her that he had found God. And I don't know about you, but I think that a prospective juror that hears that says that Richard Allen was feeling guilty, that he wanted to confess, and that he wanted to unburden his conscience, unburden his heart. However, the conditions that are described by the defense, right? Richard Allen was in the hole. He was in the hole, which is a prison in a prison, and that is complete and total isolation. And he was under 24-hour surveillance, suicide watch. Listen, a high profile detainee being under suicide watch, being under surveillance, it's a harsh reality. It is not abnormal. And suicide watch does require, by the rules of the Department of Corrections and any county jail, as a matter of fact, for the inmate to be monitored more often. But when you describe the conditions that Richard Allen was kept in over a year, not only being taunted by other inmates, the baby killer, kill yourself, which could have induced fear that he would experience some sort of harm from those inmates. When you hear about the mouse droppings, very believable, because prisons and jails are filthy. They are notoriously nasty, beyond nasty. And the fact that he was kept in those conditions, isolated for over a year, I believe is what the defense should be stressing. Because temporary psychosis is not to say that that's a bad argument, but in my opinion, it should be one of multiple arguments. Because I get where the defense is going with this. If temporary psychosis is applicable, if Judge Gold believes that that actually occurred, then there's no way any of those confessions would probably be considered voluntary, because a person who is not in their right mind cannot logically, voluntarily decide to admit to a crime, knowing the consequences that that confession would entail. Get what I'm saying? The person confessing to the crime has to understand that they are confessing to something that could have consequences, that would take away their liberty, that would separate them from their family, put them in jail, put them in prison. You get it, right? So I completely understand where the defense is coming from that. However, I think that the defense is not stressing enough the fact that Richard Allen was isolated in the hole for over a year, because there are actual studies about detainees and inmates being isolated in a prison within a prison for extended periods of time. and that causing a mental lapse. And I think that if they could actually get that in front of a jury, that at least one juror would possibly believe that Richard Allen would say anything if he thought it would get him out of the conditions that he was in. And like I said, the psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla, she testified that Allen was suicidal at that time. As far as 24-hour surveillance, never having any privacy, well, that is what happens to a person who is detained in a jail. There's no privacy. Dr. Waller needs to be able to explain to a jury that Richard Allen being concerned about his family's reactions to crime scene photos and to evidence presented against him is not out of him having this logical mind, that he really was suffering from psychosis, and that temporary psychosis did not eradicate his worry and concern over his family, and that his confessions were not out of guilt, but out of a desperate need to get out of the particular and specific circumstances that he was in at that time, which was a prison within a prison, afraid that other inmates that were next to him would find a way to harm him. That's what Waller needs to stress, because those are conditions that courts have accepted people will confess falsely under, that confession is coerced because the person is in fear for their life, or the person really, really, really wants to get out of the exact location that they're in, whether it is a really small interrogation room or the whole, a prison within a prison.